Good evening. It's a great pleasure to have all of you here for this very, very important lecture on an absolutely essential topic in the Republic of Armenia. And one of the reasons why I decided to organize this event focusing on poverty and the rights of children in Armenia is precisely because it's so essential. Yet we don't really hear about the topic very often. So I'm particularly pleased to say that Mrs. Hovannisian actually accepted my invitation to talk about this topic. First, let me say a couple of words about myself. I'm Simon Payaslian, the holder of the Ngos Chair here at Boston University. The Ngos Chair was established in 2006, and I'm honored to be the first holder of the chair. And Ms. Elizabeth Ngosian is here. Thank you for coming. I teach courses on modern Armenian history and literature, Armenian history from ancient to the Middle Ages, the history and the geopolitics of the Caucasus, a number of other courses. And this semester I'm teaching actually history of genocides in the 20th century. Before I actually invite Armine to the podium, I would like to invite Mr. Rafi Yererian to say a couple of words about one of our co-sponsors, Nasser. I really thank Nasser and the Zorian Institute in Toronto for co-sponsoring this event. So I would like to invite Rafi. Would you like to say a couple of words?
Let me cross over without tripping. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Board of Directors of NASER, the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, as chairman, I would like to welcome you all to this gathering on this beautiful fall weather outdoors to an indoor event. So I'm glad you're all in here. We are happy to be part of this event and thank Professor Simon Payaslian for giving us the opportunity to cooperate in presenting this lecture by Armine Hovannisian on a topic of interest to all Armenians. Professor Payaslian already gave the information about his being the first holder of the Ngos chair, and we thank the presence of the sponsor of the chair. And I will be brief. I welcome you all, and Nasser is happy to endorse this event. And we're happy to be part of co-sponsoring events such as this. It fits very well with the Nasser objectives of sponsoring any topic of discussion that has to do with Armenian studies in general. So welcome again, and thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All right, I would like to introduce Mrs. Armine Hovannisian. Born in Armenia, she moved to the United States as a young child. She received her BA in Diplomacy and World Affairs from Occidental College and Juris Doctorate from UCLA School of Law in 1988. She practiced law from 1989 to 1992 as civil litigator. In 1992-1993, Mrs. Hovannisian served as director of Project Hope in Armenia. I'm sure some of you remember all of this. And since 1993, she has served as executive director of the Junior Achievement Program in Yerevan. In 2000, she founded ORAN, a charity organization for children, and has served as the chairperson of its board system. ORAN, which in Armenian means haven, assists about 100 needy children and about 60 lonely elderly a day in the capital of Yerevan and 50 children in the city of Vanatsor. The center provides hot meal, medical and psychological services, tutoring and other services to children and elderly. Mrs. Armine Hovannisian has served as advisor to various civic organizations and government agencies. For example, the Minister of Education, Levon Megrtichyan, in 1998. She has been appointed by the Minister of Education to chair the committee drafting standards for civic education for the Republic of Armenian schools, and as co-chairman for Committee on Civic Education, the committee in charge of reviewing issues connected with legal reform and civic education. Mrs. Hovannisian has been active in reforming the educational programs in Armenia. She designed and implemented a program introducing 4 new subjects in the educational curriculum of the Republic. That is civics education, human rights, state and law, and applied economics. She has received numerous awards for her civic activities, including the Nansen Medal in 2006 and the Junior Achievement International's Platinum Achievement Award in 1999. Her husband, Rafi Hovannisian, served as the first foreign minister following Armenia's secession from the Soviet Union in 1991, established the Armenian Center for National and International Studies, and is the leader of the Heritage Jarankutun political party. Mrs. Armine Hovannisian currently resides in Yerevan with her husband and their 5 children. Please welcome Armine Hovannisian.
Thank you, Professor Hovannisian. Good afternoon, everybody. It's wonderful to see you here. I'm especially pleased that my Auntie Helen Baronian and my Auntie Stella Aftandilian have come. And I'm happy to see the Matosian family who are here for a wedding from Los Angeles attending. Thank you, Stella, for bringing the boys. Every time I'm asked to speak about children's rights in Armenia or to express an opinion, I'm sort of facing a dilemma because every time I think of a statement to make, immediately in my mind, I can think of so many examples that come to contradict what I was just about to say. On the one hand, Armenia is a country where physical punishment of a child is considered good discipline, or having children work in the fields under the scorching sun is not only a necessity sometimes, especially in the villages, but it's thought of as good upbringing for children, teaching them hard work, diligence, to love the land and the harvest. And not allowing a child to express a contradictory opinion, especially to an older person, is considered respect for the elderly. On the other hand, children in Armenia, as we all know from our culture, they are revered. You can attend any symphony concert or an opera, and you can see children attending at all ages, as we did with Professor Hovannisian and Arkian. We discussed it in Armenia a month ago, 3 months ago when we were at an opera in Yerevan. And they're accepted in society in these cultural events. And also, it seems like parents in Armenia live for their children. I see it all the time with our families. They go through a great deal of sacrifice and self-deprivation to make sure that their children are comfortable. And not only their children, but they worry about the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren. And I guess this is all part of our culture. Today, what I want to do is briefly talk about the legislation, the legal arena that's out there on the rights of children, give you some facts and figures, which I'm sure you can all get from Googling, and then maybe give you just an example of what organizations do, such as mine. I have an organization called ORAN, and we work with children of economically deprived families. And just as an example, I will talk about ORAN and talk to you about one family, just as an example of how families live in Armenia. The main document, the principal document guiding countries with respect to children's rights is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And this document was accepted by the UN nations in 1989, and every single country has signed under this treaty except, surprisingly, the United States and Somalia. Now, I'm sure some of you are asking, why isn't the U.S. signing under such a document? And some of the arguments is that really it's not up to the federal government to dictate the states about children's rights, that it's really the rights of the states. And there's some other arguments about it. But anyway, this is where we stand now. Armenia did sign under the convention in 1992. And the convention is known as the 3 Ps: protection, provision, participation. And it's protecting children, their rights, their right to education, protecting children against abuse and exploitation, covering the special needs of the children, education, health, and most importantly, participation of children. Because up to this point, children were seen as people who are to be protected. And it is really in this document that we find the first time where legally we're saying the children have a right to participate in the decision making, whether it affects their lives or the surroundings around them. So the document is really drafted in a way that says what is in the best interest of the child. This is the principle guiding the document. I've just listed some of the major laws and conventions and treaties that Armenia has signed under, just to show you that as a nation who's trying to be now a part of the European community, Armenia really takes these treaties very, very seriously and is more than happy to sign under the treaties and to take steps towards them. But it's interesting because sometimes signing a treaty or adopting a legislation, when it comes to implementation of that legislation, you see the different mentality. You still see the traditional role where the state really wants to protect a child. Just to give you one example, when it comes to children with disabilities. Now, Armenia has signed under a treaty where children are to be treated as an integrated part of society, as equal members of society. But at the same time, it's adopted a document where they're saying children with special disabilities need to be placed in different institutions, and it creates institutions for these children. Well, this is in direct conflict to this theory of integrating children with disabilities into full society. You are going to see a lot of different figures, and if you do your own research, you'll see that some of the figures I have aren't coinciding exactly with the figures you find. But what I've done is I have taken the official figures for my presentation, thinking if anybody argues, I can say, look, I got it from an official site. But a lot of the figures are changeable and are arguable. As you see, Armenia's population is 3.1 million now. There are 1,819,000 children, and children are defined as people who are under the age of 18. 21% of the population lives under poverty. This figure is grossly underestimated because recently even the Prime Minister admitted that there's 30% of the population lives in poverty. So it's anywhere, the figures are anywhere from 21% to 40%. And we see that children are the most vulnerable in this group. 26% of the children live in poverty. Now, anytime a word is used, poverty, it can mean different things. Poverty means different things to us sitting in this room. Poverty means something else in people who sit in Armenia. The extreme line of poverty in Armenia is $43 a month. This will not make much sense to you unless you know that the food prices, such as meat, the basic staples, the prices are comparable to the prices in the US. It is maybe in the summer that you can get some vegetables that are cheaper, maybe some fruits. Utilities cost just the same. Maybe rent is a little cheaper. But imagine with these prices earning $43 a month. And per adult, as you see, is $63. Now, where are these poor children? Besides being in their families, you know, they're in their kindergartens, they're in schools, boarding schools, orphanages. They're out of the school, maybe in institutions, maybe on the streets. Very few of them, fortunately, very few are in juvenile homes. Recently, you know that in the Soviet period, the kindergartens worked very well, and the state protected the children and their families, and it was pretty decent situation in kindergartens. But with the independence of Armenia and with the economic crisis and war, most of the kindergartens did close. Now, in the last few years, there's been a very major effort by the government to reopen these kindergartens. But the problem has been that the financing is not supposed to come from the national government, but from the local governments. And the local governments don't have much money. So as you can see, thousands of kids are out of kindergartens. There are about 1,400 schools in Armenia. Up to 2 years ago, there was no distinction between high school and elementary and junior high school. Just recently, they segregated high schools, but on a trial basis. So there are only 100 high schools in Armenia. Actually, that had some positive aspects because usually kids went to first grade with their class and graduated with their class. So they became very good friends and their families became good friends. And I know from my daughter that she loves her schoolmates so much and is very connected to them. And although she's now at UC Berkeley, she finds any excuse to go to Armenia and visit her friends because she feels they're like her sisters. We don't have the figures as to how many kids are out of school because they can't afford to go to school. Some people say 14,000, some people say 16,000. Again, this is a serious problem with the state because the state itself doesn't know how many kids are out of school because they can't afford it. But why aren't these kids in school? Well, they can't afford it. They don't have the shoes, the uniforms, the books, and it can be very expensive. And then on top of that, you know, you go first day of school, you got to take a flower to your teacher, or March 8th Women's Day comes, or Teachers' Day comes, and they're collecting money from the kids to buy a gift for the teacher. And so a lot of the kids are embarrassed because they have no money, they have no shoes. And so thousands of kids today are out of school. I don't know if in the US we have this understanding of a boarding school, but in Armenia, and it started in the Soviet period, boarding schools were not meant for the high elite society like we know in Switzerland or in the UK, but boarding schools are for kids whose families can't afford to take care of them. So the kids go to boarding school usually 5 days a week. They sleep there, they study, they eat, and then on the weekends they come and visit their families. Now you would say, okay, but what's wrong with that? Well, the problem is because you unite all these kids who are coming from economically deprived families, they really have no other friends to associate with. So they're really in that pit where everybody's in the same position, there are no role models, and you don't have the best of teachers or the best of food. And so these kids who grow up in boarding schools, you can see the imprint on their faces. You can see that their dreams aren't big. You know, these kids just have an issue of getting good food and missing their family and waiting to see them during the weekend. There are 7 boarding schools in Armenia. There are 7 state orphanages and 3 private orphanages in Armenia. And the good news is that the government is taking very serious steps with some of the international organizations to what they call download the orphanages. Because most of the kids who are in the orphanages are ones who have at least one parent. We call them social orphans. So over 80% of the children have at least one parent and are in an orphanage because the parents can't take care of the children. And no matter how much love, you know, the staff and their teachers can give to these children, obviously they are in need of love and care. The government recently, what they have done is they've started a program, and they're testing this out, is where they're uniting the children with the parents, with the family members. but they're giving so little money. It's like giving $40 a month as a stipend for the family to take care of the child. Well, that's very little money. Whereas the orphanages are getting $4,000 per child to take care of the child. Now, their expenses are very high, and it's understandable when you look at the numbers. Some of the orphanages have 100 kids, but 70 people working in the orphanage. And again, I think this is coming from the Soviet period. And to get rid of these people is another problem, because then you're creating unemployment. And where are these people going to go with, to find jobs? Another program that has started is to find foster homes for the children. And it's still on a trial basis, and 20 children have been placed in such homes. Again, the foster home family isn't getting much money for it, $125 a month, which isn't much money. And we don't know how successful these programs are going to be. Another problem that children have of the orphanages is once they graduate, they have nowhere to go. Once they reach the age of 17, 18 years old, they have to be out of an orphanage. But what do you do with them? Now, Archbishop Mesrop Sirpazan had a great program, and the diaspora and Armenians were helping him. He would take the graduate orphans, he would marry them, give them $1,000, buy them a little home in a village, give them a cow, and let them form a family. He's passed away, and that program has ceased. There are two other programs, again, initiated from diaspora and Armenians, where some of these girls are taken into a home, a united home. They cook together, they live together, they have what they call a mother overseeing them, and they're learning vocational training, the different trades. But again, it's not a solution because it's only a few kids who are involved. There are 1,732 such kids and in need of housing. Again, the state has allocated some money to buy homes for some of these children, but with the corruption, it's really been a bad situation where these kids are, some of them have gotten homes, some haven't, or what they do is maybe they'll buy a home in a very remote village or a very remote city, and the child doesn't want to go there, or they buy a house in a basement. So the problems are continuing. Adoption is working in Armenia. In the year 2011, 125 kids were adopted, and 63 of them were adopted locally and 62 by diaspora and Armenians. Luckily, we do not have many juveniles in Armenia. There is a center for juveniles, a special center for women and juveniles. And I guess it's because how the law is drafted. If a child is under 14, he cannot be punished in an institution. If they are under 14, they're registered with the state. They still continue living with the family. But if the situation is very difficult, then there is an institution. It's like a school, a boarding school called Vartashen, where the kids are taken. In the Abovian Juvenile Center, there are only 11 children. As I said previously, there are 16,000 children out of school, and mostly because of financial difficulties. We always boast in Armenia that we have 99% literate community, and it is true, but we are losing that edge. I get sad and happy when I visit some of these poor families, and you'll see nothing in the room, but you will see a stack of books. But as the years have gone by, now those stack of books have gone down as well because people have sold it or burned it for heating purposes. So, this is an issue that really the state needs to seriously think about it. The state provides for free medical exams and hospital care for all children under 7. After 7, services are free if the kids are socially vulnerable, and there are categories if there's more than 4 children under 18 at home, if there's handicapped people, if it's a single parent. The death at birth has gone down recently, so it stands now only 13 deaths from 1,000 at birth up to 5 years old. and 19% under the age of 5 experience stunted growth. At my center, we see a lot of children who are coming from very poor families with stunted growth, but the good news is once you start feeding them after a few years, they start developing. 15% are overweight. Now you'll say, okay, but what are these kids eating? Really, I think there's a big vacuum here where children at school and even parents, of course, are not learning about good nutrition. So the main food of the family is, not that they have any choice, most of them don't have a choice, is potatoes and very cheap, locally made pasta. So when you visit homes, this is what people are eating, potatoes and pasta all day. There is some social assistance by the state. When a child is born, money is given about $1,000. What you see sometimes is these families who are extremely poor, just to get the $1,000, are having one more child, not thinking who's going to raise that child. So you find the poor families having more and more children. And so I don't know if this is good or bad for them, Children do get money first day of school, if there's death in the family, if there's a child up to 2 years old, and there is a program that used to be called PAROS. It's like the welfare system here, but people get very little money for it, maybe $40, $50 a month. And you have to, as in the U.S., you have to be qualified to get the money from the state. Around 165,000 families are registered for the welfare services, but only 91,000 are qualified to receive it and receive it. They receive, under the state legislation, $14 per child, $14 a month per child. And if they have more than 4 children, then the children receive $17 a month. I talked to you about the money that the state gives, and these are some of the figures, so because, again, the reason I'm doing this is for you to understand that the state means well, and it signs under all of these international treaties and adopts local legislation, but when there's no money, it really doesn't help much. When a first child is born, they get $1,000, but then they get another $125 for a few months. When a third and following children are born, they get $1,075. And I guess the reason the government is doing this is because Armenia is depopulating very quickly. One of our biggest concerns is that thousands and thousands of people are leaving the country. Last year, we had 80,000 people in 1 year who left the country. They're going to Europe, they're going to America, they're going to Russia, and sadly even to Turkey. Russia, a few years ago, started this special program where they're paying $10,000 to $14,000 a family to move to Russia, to Siberia, where they have their isolated, desolated lands nobody wants, and they move Armenian families there. They provide them with jobs so they can make a living. And of course, they have to sign a paper that they can't move out for a few years. So we are losing a lot of people, and we can't blame them. If there's no food, if there's no job in Armenia, then they're going to make the best out of it, even if it means to go to Siberia. Who is helping the poor people of Armenia? As we discussed, the government is not much help. Remittances, what this means is husbands and brothers and fathers going out of the country, working in Russia mostly, and sending every month a sum amount to the families to help them out. You can imagine what happens to these families, and I see it over and over again, where the fathers leave to make money, and they stay there for a few years. They help initially the first few years. They forget about their families after a few years. They start new families in Russia and other places because of the obligation, and the pain is just too much. They don't want that responsibility. And of course, we find many single mothers in Armenia because of this fact. So we've lost our fathers and our husbands not only in the Karabakh war, but we've lost them to the other cities for employment purposes. $996 million, this is in dollars, that are being sent to Armenia to the families by people who go work outside of Armenia. And of course, many of the churches, especially the ones that are based in the diaspora, many organizations in the diaspora do critical work for Armenia. When you think what the diaspora has done since the earthquake, and you think what could have happened had we not had the diaspora, it's really alarming. Many projects are underway, much good work is being done, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. There are 300 local NGOs in Armenia that are registered, that are supposed to work with the children. But again, because of finances, very few people, very few organizations do effective work. Some of these organizations are founded just to get little mini grants from international organizations and to provide jobs for the founders and their families. But soon you run out of those grants, so it's very difficult to keep up the work for years and years. As an example of an NGO, in conclusion, I want to talk about the work that my organization is doing, Oran, just as an example of how we help the children of the poor families. And it's an organization that my husband Rafi and I founded in the year 2000. And we weren't meant to start an organization at all because I had a full job with Junior Achievement of Armenia, and Rafi was very busy. But I know that every time Rafi and I would go out to an evening affair, to dinner, or to the theater, and we'd come out and we'd see a child with an extended palm, we would be very upset because we were raised in the diaspora where we thought that, every Armenian is a family member, and we couldn't tolerate to see children begging in Armenia. And we would start talking to each other, and we'd say, we just spent $100 on our dinner, and we could have, fed this child's family for a whole week. And this was our conversation for many months before one day we decided that, let's try to do something for these children. And because we lived far away, not in downtown Yerevan, we rented a very small place, and we gathered 16 children from the streets who were begging on the streets, and we provided a hot meal. But friends of ours, family members heard, and everybody started donating money, and the kids were telling each other about Oran, so the kids were bringing other friends, and we grew to be a very good organization right now. We feed over 100 children at Oran of Yerevan, and we have 55 in Vanadzor, but we just opened our new building there, so we will take in more children. We'll go up to 100. So what Oran is in the morning, because the children are at school, we're taking the elderly. It's a soup kitchen for the elderly in the morning. We provide a hot meal to 55 elderly. Around 1 o'clock, the children start coming from their schools, their regular community schools. And if they're not in a school, we make sure that we place them in a regular school. So the children are coming from school. We give them transportation money so they don't have to walk to Oran. And they have a hot meal. They are divided into groups. We have 4 teachers who do homework with them, and each child is coming from a different school and it has different homework, so they need a lot of individual tutoring. We have many volunteers working with them. We have 4 arts and crafts workshops where children are learning different trades. So the children are eating, they're doing their homework, they're learning trades, and they participate in many cultural events. We try to provide jobs for the families. 7 of the parents are hired by Oran and work at Oran. We try to implement all sorts of programs, even for our graduate students, kids who graduated Oran. We had a wonderful program where we coupled a child with a master, and the master was to train the child in the skills he knew. So the kids who aren't going to continue with college, we asked them what skills they wanted to learn. Some wanted shoe repairman, repairing cellular phones, hairdresser, all kinds of skills. And we would pay $500 for the master to teach the child the skill. Then we would buy tools for the child for $100, And then we would even give them mini grants to start a little business. And it was wonderful because last time we did it, two of our young boys, 18 years old, they combined their efforts and they wrote a business plan for us. So we ended up giving them $1,600, and they rented a very small boutique, and they started repairing cellular phones, and they're making money now and a living. So these are the kinds of things we would like to see. I am just going to very briefly talk about one family, just so you see the extent of poverty, and I will be happy then to answer questions. This is just one example of a family. Because all of our families have had sad stories like this. But when we found this photograph of Ashken, I thought it's so typical of her life that I wanted to share it with you. I called it Shattered Dreams because this is a woman who's 36 years old. She has no husband, and she has two children to take care of, Susie, who's 13, and Mishik, who's 7 years old. So we found Ashken in the market early in the morning. She was selling fruits and vegetables, and she told us that what she would do is she would wake up 4 a.m. in the morning, go to the market, buy produce from the village folks who had brought it, mark it up, very small markup, and sell it to make sure that she can take at least $2 to $3 a day for the kids at home. And of course, you can imagine how tired she gets all day standing and working. And this isn't her car, but she takes a little nap in the afternoon just to rest up. So we're going to walk with Ashken and see the kind of home she lives in. This is the street she walks on. The apartment she's renting. She doesn't own it. And her daughter Susie's waiting for her, 13 years old. Susie is a child of Oran. We're helping Susie. And Susie is with her brother Mishik. Now this is a good day because Mishik is home. Usually Mishik is in a boarding school. Susie is not in a boarding school because we've made every effort to keep Susie at Oran. So this is Ashken's home. And it's not as big as it seems. It's all two very small rooms. This is her kitchen and her bathroom. That's her laundry machine. This is where the kids play on the roof. And you see the electric wires all loose and how dangerous it can be for the children. This is their living room, very small. It's the size of a chicken coop. And this is Mishik, and this is his bed. And this is Susie, and this is her bed. And this is their family, and it is their bed. Imagine sleeping all three of them on that small bed every night. Like any other mother, Ashken has to cook for her children after work, and you see she's making potatoes. If it's a good day, but for her an unfortunate day, and she hasn't sold all of her vegetables, she might bring something rotten home to make for the kids, something she can't sell anymore. She gives a bath to Mishik in the same place she cooks. And I always say that the biggest victims of poverty are the women, because the children, no matter how poor they are, I see them, especially in the summer, running around without shoes, screaming, throwing water at each other. They're happy little kids, but really it's the mothers and it's the pain you see on their faces that tells you all. This little boy is enjoying his bath. Susie helps her mother around. She does the laundry. No matter what, they are a happy family. They try to make the best of it. Susie helps with homework, as we help Susie to do her homework. But Ashken can't forget the past. This is her brother. Her husband accidentally killed her brother, and the mother couldn't take the pain of losing her son, so she threw herself on the same day from 10th floor of the building they were living in. So on the same day, she lost her brother, her mother. Within a month, she lost her father, who was too sick and couldn't take the pain. And she lost her husband because he was put in prison. So they live by the memories, by their photographs. And we're having problems here, but I think enough is said. And this is one family. It's just an example of how families live in Armenia, and what we try to do for them. I will be happy to answer your questions, but at the end, I do want to say something that has really guided me. It was a quotation I read years ago where it said, "You are at your tallest when you bend to help a child." And it's really been my guiding principle to stand as tall as I can by helping the children of Armenia. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have about 15 to 20 minutes or so for questions, but we're supposed to have 2 mics. So we have 2 mics. If you're going to ask a question, please let us know so we can bring you the mic.
Turn off that mic, the fan. This machine, it might be quieter. So
All right. It's been turned off. All right.
Women to do it.
Good. Yeah. all that time she was like impatiently waiting. All right. Questions?
What is the average salary that a person, a man earns, and what is considered a good salary by the week?
It's about $90. That's what a teacher would make, $90. The lowest salary is probably $40 a month.
We're going by the month.
By the month, $40 a month. Teachers make about 200, 250. Some of the international organizations pay well. You can earn somewhere between $1,000 to $1,500 to even $2,000. Some of
The
the
average is like
international-
90. If you're working for the government or something like
Yeah.
that, it's 90.
It's about $100, $90.
Yeah. Okay. And can they have a good life on that?
No, and that's why corruption is rampant in Armenia. It's,
Oh, okay.
you find it at every level.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. Well, a lot. It's just very, very disturbing. That slide you had about the help, and there are some churches, and then there are 300 NGOs. I mean, knowing something about like nonprofits and NGOs, I'm just wondering. Now, what you're doing sounds absolutely fabulous. I mean, it would be great if somebody multiplied what you're doing. But then, are those 300 NGOs like all making a small dent and it's really working, or are they all just kind of going after the same pie and sometimes you don't know what's being accomplished?
Actually, I would say that in the field of children, maybe there are about 4 or 5 organizations that do major work or are making a dent, as you say. But the others, as I explained, they are just established, registered with the Ministry of Justice, just to try to get some little grants here and there. And even with the grants and the work they do, if it's not continuous, if there's no follow-up, really you're losing a lot. And, I ask myself every day if I'm spending the dollar to get the maximum effect out of it, because I understand that I have to feed a child. He's hungry, the child is hungry. I have to educate a child, I have to buy him clothes, but I want much more than that. I want to secure a future for the child, and that's why we put such emphasis on education and vocational training, because, we can feed the children for 10 years, 15 years, but then what? And we can feed maybe 100 children, 1,000 children, but there are thousands and thousands of these children. So I think that all of these organizations, and I myself, we need to find a good balance where we are meeting the urgent needs of the kids, but also thinking of their future and what their life is going to be like.
And what kind of help do you get from just internationally? And also, I'm just curious, what kind of help you get from Turkey?
Turkey?
Yeah.
Armenia, you mean?
Yes.
Armenia doesn't get any help from Turkey as of now.
Even like as far as children or education or
No.
nothing.
No.
There's nothing that
no,
comes
I
to
did
you.
visit, I was telling Professor Simon a while ago, I did visit Istanbul a few months ago, and unfortunately there was an immigrant community from Armenia there, and a few thousand people. And because the Armenians from Armenia are there illegally, they can't go to regular schools. Even the Armenian schools don't accept them. So they have founded in the basement of the evangelical church a school for the immigrant Armenians. And I'm sure that the Turkish government knows about this, but is closing their eyes to it. But how sad it must be for an Armenian to prefer the Turkish basement over their homeland. Yes.
I don't need this one.
That's
why I thought-
it's for the camera. This microphone is for the camera.
You brought up a very excellent point. All these efforts to help the children, left and right, is fine, but it doesn't solve the long-term economic problems of Armenia.
That's right.
From your perspective, what are the solutions or the solutions? I mean, we see, is it because the country is in infancy, that's why we have all this corruption? Just take, for example, Turkey. I mean, they have gone through huge economic improvement, let's say. First of all, what is the problem with Armenia, if you know, and what kind of model can be applied to our Armenian infrastructure, economy to make it better, create jobs, things like that. Otherwise, people will leave, as you mentioned. People are leaving by thousands, and if I'm sure you have heard that in a very high level, Azerbaijani officials in the Azerbaijani government, they always verbalize this that Yerevan is part of Western Azerbaijan. From their perspective, Armenia is the historical Western Azerbaijan, and I'm afraid that if Armenia loses this kind of gets depopulated the way it is, they'll be more inclined to do something, militarily, let's say. Anyways, but economic points are the most important. From your perspective, what are the solutions?
I wish I could answer your question, because if I could, I'd be running for president now in Armenia. But I think with everything, I think it's the willpower to change things. And I think I'm not seeing that in the government of Armenia. And I don't want to sound very pessimistic, because lots of wonderful things are happening in Armenia. And things are changing very slowly, but they are. Civil society is forming. But I think we have long ways to go. I think we're on short democracy. We have economic issues with investment. Corruption is rampant. I mean, there needs to be some serious reforms. Can this government or any other government do it? I don't know. You're born in a Soviet system. You're raised in a corrupted country for 70 years. That's what you've heard from your parents. And are you going to change overnight and all of a sudden say, okay, now, I'm going to self-sacrifice everything as a government official and make sure that my country prospers? I think not. I think it's going to take some time. I think it's going to take a change in the mentality of the people. People are tired of promises of the government. All of the elections have been rigged. There haven't been free elections in Armenia. And what was sad in the May elections that just happened for parliament in May was that in the previous years, you would have ballot stuffing, you would have people turning off the lights and stealing the ballot boxes and stuff. Well, this time everybody had gotten very sophisticated, the ruling party, and they weren't doing anything like that. They were just handing people money to vote for them. Some people got $100, some people got 50, some 20, and this is the sad part, because if people were willing to revolt, to say no to that money and to demand better things, then there's some hope. But when you have now a population where they're saying, you know what, I'm tired of all this, just give me my money because you guys are going to do whatever you're going to do, and I don't care. And you have foreign investors who say, you know what, enough of this trying, we're getting out of Armenia. Then, you know, the future doesn't seem that bright unless, again, there's some where we reach a point where we say, you know, enough is enough, whether it's the people who rise up or the government officials, which is more unlikely, say enough is enough, we got to take care of our country, because we will be losing our country with the thousands that are leaving.
Can you comment on the military requirements in Armenia for men and women? And also, once these boys and girls reach a certain age, do they turn to the military, joining or being required to serve
For the
in
men,
order to get a
yes.
better life?
Military is compulsory for men, not for women. Women are not drafted. Men are, but you know that's understandable because we're still at war. We're technically at war with Azerbaijan, and it could erupt any minute. You know, every day we hear things happening at the frontiers, back and forth, shootings going on, the firing at each other. So just like Israel, we need it. We need to have the men trained. And yes, anyone who is at the age of 18 has to serve in the military. Unless you're getting a PhD or a master's degree, then it's postponed for a few years until you get your degree. Then, you know, you go back and serve in the military. There has been a lot of controversy over, you know, are the soldiers getting proper food and nutrition? But they aren't. It's not perfect, but it has gotten much, much better in the recent years. And the great thing about technology is that some of these abuses in the military are filmed and put on YouTube, and it makes, you know, I'm sure some of you have seen it, and, you know, the civil society activists make a big deal out of it. And so they have to improve on some of the things. But again, you know, there's bribery where you bribe for your child not to be drafted in the military, or they're drafted to be within the city of the capital and they come to visit all the time and you take them food. Or you know, you pay the sergeant to let you go visit your family. I mean, there's always corruption. But I think the new Minister of Defense, who's been there for about 4 years now, he is a general from Karabakh who's lost his leg in Karabakh. So I think he has a better understanding of the value of the youth and the military. So I think he's taking measures to improve things.
How many years are they required to serve? And do
Two.
you get many of them
2 years.
actually that look to the military to make it a career?
Oh, I'm sure, I don't have the figures, but I'm sure some do. And there is a military school for boys as well. Yes. Yes, there's one named after Monte Melkonian. He is the Fresno Armenian who went and fought in Karabakh and lost his life. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Artem Gegaman, and I'm studying at Harvard University, Kennedy School of Government. And thank you very much for the presentation. And my question concerns the corruption in secondary school in Armenia. My daughter is 7 years old, and my son is 4, and my daughters go to school now. And we decided that it would be better for her to go to private school. And of course, we are paying for it, and it's a bit difficult for my family to afford it. But still, we made this choice because we think that in public schools, the level of corruption is very high, and it also affects the culture in general. It's not just a legal or criminal issue. It's a bigger and wider sociological issue, maybe, because when the child goes to school, and then teachers, they say, okay, if you want to make better, receive better grades, you have to take extra hours, and you have to pay for this. You know, this is already we're kind of legitimizing that that way of corruption, how it works, and then children they grow and they go to university, and the rule is that you pay money in order to get in finest universities. So this is the rule, and the exception is if you made it by your own. So, and after you graduate, again, before the time in higher education system, you again pay bribes, and again, this is rule, and this is not the exception. Exception are the other students that they're making it themselves. And another rule is that after graduation, you pay another bribe to appointed like a judge or prosecutor or investigator or whatever. So I mean, this is the whole chain, and which started from the from age of 5, 6 when kids go to school. So my question is, maybe you have conducted some kind of research survey, or how you see the solution of these things, because I think the corruption is the biggest problem of Armenia, and it was very well mentioned by you that people coming from Soviet time, or those issues are coming from Soviet times. And my guess is the biggest problem of Armenia is that the current leadership, so-called leadership, is coming from Soviet Union, and they have that mentality. So it blocks the country, and we can't develop anymore. So, thank you.
Obviously, you're talking about your children in Armenia attending school.
Yes.
All right, but you were the big exception, it seems, because you made it here without bribes. Actually, surveys have been done, and corruption is the biggest in the education arena. You're absolutely right. Artem? Yes. Artem is absolutely right, because it's so ingrained in the system that people don't even think of it as corruption. Or people, things will happen and you say, well, wait a minute, that's conflict of interest. In Armenian, the term is not even translated, because to them, they don't comprehend what does it mean in conflict of interest. If I have a job, I'm going to give it to my niece or my brother. What do you mean? You're absolutely right, and I don't know. I know that when I visit schools through the Junior Achievement Program, because we're teaching high school students civic education, and part of the civic education is that the kids have to form student governments within their classes or schools. And it's funny, the remarks I will get in the villages, because I'll say, okay, kids, who are you going to vote for as your president? And, somebody will say, okay, but our teacher already told us who we're voting for. And it's like, this whole exercise is to teach you to think independently. So again, one NGO, a few NGOs, a few government honest officials, they're not going to change this, because it's so much part of society. It needs fundamental changes, starting from kindergarten, having role models. I think, in Armenia, you don't have the role models. How do societies learn? They learn through role models, through schooling, through television propaganda. We don't have any of this. In fact, what we do have is just the opposite, where now Armenia TV for the last few years is filled with these cheap soap operas that they make in Armenia. And the reason they do this is because by law, every channel is supposed to have a few hours of its own production. And the cheapest thing to do is to make these soap operas. So they make these soap operas, and the language used in these soap operas and the values that they discuss, it is just appalling. And, and in America, you have a different problem. You have the problem of violence and drugs. And, fortunately, in Armenia, we don't have, among young people, we don't have the problem of drugs or prostitution, or at least it's not at numbers where we really need to be concerned about. But yes, these kids open up their eyes, and they're faced with corruption. The teacher wants something, whether it's flowers or gifts, or I know that my oldest son got in. He was 8 years old, and we had moved to Armenia when he was 5. And one day he said to me, Mom, no matter what answer I give to my math teacher, she's still giving me a B, a 4, which is the equivalent of a B. And she keeps saying, Garin, if you want, come after school and I will tutor you. Well, the teacher knows that we can afford to pay for tutoring. So, but my son had understood. Now, he was only 8, but he understood something is wrong with this. He understood that there was something not right there. Now, somebody who was born in Armenia, and that's all they've seen and heard in the family, I'm not even sure that they think it's wrong. You know what I'm saying? It's so much part of the system that sometimes people don't think anything is wrong. I know that when we opened up Oran, I forbade any employee to take any gifts, whether it was chocolate or flowers. And sure enough, we would have these new families and the parents bring us flowers and chocolate, and I had to return those. And people got offended. You know, the parents got offended here. They bought me flowers and I was returning it back. Of course, I was trying to teach them that they don't owe us anything, that it's part of our job to serve them. But again, it's almost so many years of that habit. It's almost part of their culture. And so it's going to take a few years, lots of hard work.
Thank you so much. An unbearable to hear presentation, I must say. Is there a significant women's movement at any level in Armenia? And because women kind of get this maybe a little more easily, and might there be any kind of sense of empowerment among women, even a Lysistrata type movement?
It's an interesting question you asked because, well, there's all kinds of initiatives that they start, but once again, I'm not sure if the women of Armenia are ready for the change because only 9% of the parliament members are women, and only because by law, if you're a political party and you present your list, you got, after I think 5 names, you got to have a woman. So the 6th person has to be a woman. And why aren't women in the parliament? Because 1, the men will not allow it, but 2, women themselves have a problem. They can't compete with the oligarchs, and they're too much into this traditional role of being a woman, and to them, politics is just the man's job. We only have actually 2 ministers, women, Minister of Culture and Minister of Diaspora, and you will never see a woman being Minister of Finances or, you know, economics or anything else. It's always social or education maybe. So there are movements, and the movements are usually spurred by these little grants that, whether it's the United States government giving or the UN agencies giving to start something, but it's not a big issue in Armenia, and I think people aren't ready for it. I know that even in the classes that I visit, and the students are holding elections, it's the girls who work the hardest in the class, but it's the males who get elected, and it's the women it's the girls who elect the boys, you know. So this is a problem. Yeah, again, but I think also role models. We don't have any role models. Thank you.
I think you're a role model.
Thank you, Auntie Stella. I think you're biased, Auntie Stella. Thank you.
You know, I've just gotten back from visiting several orphanages in Armenia, and there's one issue I'd like to clarify. I'm sponsoring a young girl in the Gava orphanage. Now, and you know this business about they don't have parents or they have one parent. In her case, which I happen to know particularly about, her father has completely disappeared, and the mother's whereabouts is a mystery. The only person who visits her is a grandfather from time to time. But I am told that there's a rule or a custom or a law in Armenia that if there are no parents and the child turns 16 and the parents have disappeared, that the government gives the child an apartment. Is that correct?
Yes, we discussed it. There are about 1,700 kids on that waiting list.
So for that reason, the parents disappear until the child turns 16, and then to get the apartment, they reappear. That
It's
must be
possible.
true. Yeah.
It's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, you know, in America, the policy is if you're an orphanage, you're a tax-exempt organization, so you don't pay for whatever you spend. But that's not true in Armenia.
No.
Now that's contradictory that the government supports, and I think that's a bit of cynicism there, because many diasporan Armenians are supporting these orphanages, so they feel that that's just more money they'll have to pay, because if they do a construction work or add a building or something, then they have to pay for that. And they have to pay a tax on the money spent.
No, I should correct that. There is a government commission called the Humanitarian Commission, and it's part of the government. And if you are an organization, you have to present your application to them. And if you are building, I know because we just built a center in Vanadzor, you have to go through the process, and they will exempt you from paying value-added tax, which is 20%, which we just got on our building. It is a long process, it's a tedious process, and not every organization is willing to go through it. But if you do, the process is there. Now, local Armenians who donate money to a charity, their donation is not tax exempt.
That's why I say it's a cynical business.
But you know, the reason I think they do it is because of the corruption. That only will feed corruption. I can just imagine what can happen. Yeah.
But of course, they get around it to some extent by paying the contractors directly, rather than, you can make the gift directly to the people who are going to do the work, rather than to the orphanage.
Yeah.
And that way, avoid that.
Yeah.
Value
If I may,
tax.
I know I'm very young to give advice to anybody in this room, but if I may say so to anybody who's considering giving to any donation to Armenia, is that you hold the people accountable to it. At Oran, we get an audit every single year by an international company, Grant Thornton or KPMG. Now, when we started Oran 10 years ago, the second year, our total budget was $60,000. We didn't have that many children. Out of $60,000, we paid $6,000 for the audit. 10% went to audit because we thought it was very important. I can buy Oran's food in the market or outside from the street at half the price. I pay twice as much to buy it from a store, to get a receipt, so that I can be accountable to my donors and to my audits. People all the time come to me at Oran, friends, family members, especially, they'll stick $500, they'll give me an envelope. Oh, Armine, I don't need a receipt. I don't need a receipt. You do whatever you want. I don't do that. I immediately call my accountant and a second person. Two people have to come in with the receipt and give a receipt to the donor, whether it's my mother or my sister, because the donor needs to understand that this is a professional organization that has accountability. Diasporan Armenians too many times fall. Now, you wouldn't do that in the States, right? You wouldn't give somebody cash to bypass the taxes. The same diasporan Armenian will come to Armenia and will do the most illegal stuff. And it's like, wait a minute, just because this is Armenia doesn't mean that you can get around the system. So the best thing for you to do is always, if you can, bank transfers, receipts, accountability as to how much the money is spent. I told you, orphanages, they get $4,000 a child a year. Plus, everybody who walks into Armenia from the diaspora, they go to help those orphanages. Where's all that money?
On the issue of corruption, I've been visiting orphanages in Armenia for the last 20 years. On the issue of corruption, now you say 125 children were adopted last year. That's relatively nothing. And there's a lot of corruption involved in this adoption process.
Right.
Which is, it's absurd.
It is.
It's disheartening.
It is.
I'm not sure Armenia will survive under the circumstances.
No, you're right. Yes.
If I may, I have 4 questions, very brief ones. But I'm just curious, for my own curiosity, if the corruption was part of a Soviet era, is the same corruption has manifested itself in other ex-Soviet republics like, I don't know,
I'm sure.
Kazakhstan or...
Oh, yes,
we
yes,
have the same
definitely. And maybe in some republics worse than in Armenia.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Okay. The other question is.
But also, I just wanted to note, in the Soviet period, everybody was stealing from the government. Now it's all private.
Yes.
So these private businessmen, I always ask the private businessmen how they do it because, for example, Grand Candy, which produces chocolate, I'm sure that some get stolen. Of course, they put checks and stuff, but I think every businessman is telling me that in their mind they account for a few percent, whether it's 5 or 10% loss. Yeah.
The next question is, if you do remember the parliament assassinations that happened 10 years ago in
Yes.
Armenia, was that part of a reaction to the corruption in Armenia?
No, that's how the killer presented Hovannisian, but that wasn't the case. It was, I think, more political. I don't think we'll know the story for many years to come, but if 10 people were assassinated in the parliament, including the speaker and deputy speaker of the parliament and 9 parliamentarians, including the prime minister, then Vasken Sarkisian. The excuse was that you bloodthirsty government representatives were going to get rid of you, but it wasn't. It was a very sophisticated political plot. The rumor is it could have been originated from Russia or the U.S. No one knows. Somebody did it.
The other question is, so we have this quote-unquote so-called the Arab Spring, all this popular uprising in Arab world and other places. Are there any indications that something like that can happen in Armenia?
Well, it happened 5 years ago during the presidential elections, where the first president of Armenia, Levon Ter-Petrosyan, was participating in the elections, and there were thousands and thousands of people in the Opera Square for many days. But it was quelled by the government on March 1st. Many people got killed. A lot got imprisoned for political purposes. So, and this is part of the reason people are tired. People got killed, people got imprisoned, and no one took care of them. In fact, we took one of the kids whose father got killed on March 1st during those demonstrations at Oran. Yeah.
On the positive side, actually, I've seen some, if I may just briefly say that, I'm sure you heard of the Narigati School for Children in Karabakh, in Stepanakert, sorry.
Right.
I'm really impressed with their output.
They are.
I've seen some.
They do great work in Yerevan, too.
Yeah, there's the Said Nova School for Children there. They came here last year or 2 years ago, and they performed in Lexington here. I'm really shocked by the level of sophistication and everything. I don't know which Armenia it is that I'm looking at. I mean, I'm seeing all this high-level cultural things.
Right.
On the other hand,
And that's why I said in the beginning that I'm always in a dilemma when I'm asked about, whether it's children's rights or anything else, because we can say all the bad things, but then there's so many wonderful things happening in Armenia, especially in the cultural
I was so
world.
proud seeing all those videos. I mean, they are so good, and they are truly Armenian.
Yeah, and also with education, with all the problems education has, we have a wonderful scholarship system now, and it's called the Luis program. Artyom, are you Luis? Okay, so you tell us what the Luis program does, because that's
this is one program, and before this program, I was thinking that Armenia is a really disappearing country, as it was described by the UN in one of the UN reports because of demographic issues. Well, this is, and that's. Yeah, thank you very much. So the idea of Luis Foundation is that Armenian students, and the citizenship is not a criteria. So if you are Armenian, even living in the United States or elsewhere, and you are a citizen of those countries, but you are not a citizen of Armenia, you are still eligible for the scholarship. And the condition is that you are admitted to the finest top 10 universities in the world. As far as I know, about 2 years ago, the list was much
smaller.
Big. No,
bigger.
It was bigger, but because of financial reasons. So they were even founding like universities in Moscow, like Lomonosov University or Japan or elsewhere. But now they have mainly in the United States, UK, and I think one university in Switzerland and also another one in France. So they provide like 50% of tuition and also living expenses. And I mean, without it, I couldn't make it here. So because I was admitted 2 years ago and I deferred twice, and finally.
So here's Adzion from Armenia studying at Harvard.
Very positive note. We shall conclude this lecture. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.